Welcome, class. Today we're going to discuss Chapter 6. This is Skin and Membranes. This chapter will discuss the skin and what's called appendages. The appendages of the skin are the hair, nails, and skin glands. The skin itself is called the integumentary system, and it is also referred to as the integument. The skin is the principal organ of the integumentary system. The skin is one of a group of anatomically simple but functionally important sheet-like structures of the body called membranes. This chapter will begin with the classification and discussion of important body membranes. In this chapter, you will learn to classify, compare the structure of, and give examples of each type of body membrane. Describe the structure and function of the epidermis and dermis. List and briefly describe each accessory organ of the skin. And list and discuss the 5 primary functions of the integumentary system. We will also list and briefly describe the 3 most common types of skin cancer, and we will classify burns and describe how to estimate the extent of a burn injury. So, classification of body membranes. So, membranes cover and protect the body surface. They line body cavities, and they cover the inner surfaces of hollow organs such as the digestive, reproductive, and respiratory passageways. Some membranes anchor organs to each other or to bones, and others cover the internal organs. In certain areas of the body, membranes excrete lubricating fluids that reduce friction during organ movements, such as the beating of the heart or expansion and recoil of the lungs. Membrane lubricants also decrease friction between joints. And there are 2 major categories or classifications. The first is going to be epithelial membranes. These are composed of epithelial tissue and an underlying layer of connective tissue. Then we have connective tissue membranes. These are composed largely of various types of connective tissue. So here you can see the epithelial membranes and an image of connective tissue. So in the epithelial, you'll notice here we have cutaneous, serous, and mucous membranes. We can also see where we have a visceral pleura, parietal pleura. You can see where the diaphragm is, which is that muscle that goes from the thorax and the abdomen, splits it in half. And then we have visceral peritoneum, parietal peritoneum, and you can see the synovial membranes. That's the connective tissue in joints. So, cutaneous membrane. When we say cutaneous, we mean skin. Serous membranes, these are simple squamous epithelium on a connective tissue basement membrane. So basically, connective tissue is the basement at the bottom, and then we have the simple squamous epithelium on the top. There are different types of serous membranes. We have parietal and visceral. So the parietal layer is this layer lines the walls of body cavities, and the visceral layer covers the organs found in body cavities. Example, pleura. The pleura has the parietal and visceral layers that line the walls of the thoracic cavity and cover the lungs. In the peritoneum, we have parietal and visceral layers that line walls of the abdominal cavity and cover the organs in that cavity. So let's talk about this a little bit more. Visceral will cover the organs of, like for instance, if we say peritoneum, that is the abdomen. So the visceral peritoneum covers organs of the abdomen. Parietal peritoneum is the membrane that covers the interior of the abdominal cavity as a whole. Now, with serous membranes, oftentimes we can have diseases that are associated with these. For instance, if it is in the pleura, right? The visceral pleura and the parietal pleura, it talks about that in the book. Remember, parietal is the layer of the serous membrane that lines the walls of a body cavity like a wallpaper covers the walls of a room. And the visceral layer is the portion of membrane that covers the surface of organs within the body. So the visceral is actually covering the lungs. Visceral pleura covering the lungs. The parietal pleura is covering the thoracic cavity. So when we talk about diseases, they're going to be named apparent to their location of the serous membrane. In pleurisy, pleura, hence lungs, there is inflammation of serous membranes that line the chest cavity and cover the lungs. And it is a very painful condition. Then in peritonitis, this is if we're dealing with our visceral or parietal peritoneum. And this is inflammation of the serous membranes in the abdominal cavity that line the walls and cover the abdominal organs. Peritonitis can lead to serious infection and what we call sepsis, which is when the infection gets into our blood throughout our body. Now let's talk a little bit about mucous membranes. These line body surfaces that open directly to the exterior. So like our eyes, around our eyes we have mucous membranes, our nose and our mouth. And basically you can think of any of those that line the respiratory, digestive, urinary, reproductive tracts. They produce mucus, which is a thick secretion that keeps the membrane soft and moist. Now let's talk a little bit about connective tissue membranes. They do not contain epithelial components because epithelial components are components of skin layers. They produce a lubricant called synovial fluid. Remember that image in the knee. Examples of synovial membranes in the spaces between the joints and in the lining of bursal sacs. The bursa are cushion-like little sacs that are found between any moving body parts, like in our knee and our elbow, hip, shoulder. Now let's talk about the skin. The skin provides a lot of things, but let's start with our structure first. And again, you're not expected to label it, but you need to know like what's the top layer and the second layer and below that, okay? So we have the epidermis, and there's an old joke. Some of y'all might remember this. Your epidermis is showing, so basically that's the skin layer that you see. Skin pigment, which is controlled by melanin in the skin cells. Then we have a epidermal junction, and then we have the dermis, and then underneath that we have the subcutaneous layer. So the epidermis is the outermost and the thinnest primary layer of skin. It is composed of several layers of stratified squamous epithelium. So it's stratified squamous epithelium. Now the stratum germinativum is the innermost layer of the cells that continually reproduce. These are new cells that move towards the surface. That's why we like exfoliate, right? Get our dead skin cells off. As cells approach the surface, they are filled with a tough, waterproof protein called keratin, and keratin is so important to know. Eventually, these cells will flake off. Then we have the stratum corneum. This is the outermost layer of this keratin-filled cells. Remember, keratin is waterproof protein. It's very tough. And we have a keratin-filled cell layer in this stratum corneum. Now, skin pigment, this comes from the deepest epidermal layer. It's responsible for the production of the pigment, which gives skin its color, right? The brown pigment melanin is produced by specialized skin or cells in this layer. And blisters are caused by a breakdown of union between cells or primary layers of skin. So here's a microscopic view, like what you see in your book. So you can see at the top, we have our epidermis. Then underneath that epidermis, you'll see what's called that dermal epidermal junction. And that's kind of where it's joining the epidermis with the dermis. The dermis down here is the deeper of the two layers. So we got epidermis on the top, and the deeper of the two layers is the dermis, and it is thicker than the epidermis, and it is made up mostly of connective tissue. So the dermis has most of our connective tissue in here. It also has a lot of other things that you can see going on. You can see the oil glands. You can see where we have like our hairs coming up through the dermis. Then you have the subcutaneous tissue at the bottom, this yellow subcutaneous. We also call this like adipose or fatty kind of tissue here, also known as the hypodermis. So subcutaneous tissue, again, it has a lot of kind of fatty adipose tissue. You can see the yellow. I always think of adipose tissue as yellow. And again, it can be known as the hypodermis. Now, fat in this subcutaneous layer actually insulates the body from the extremes of heat and cold. And it also serves as a storage source of energy for the body that can be released to support metabolic demands when required. In addition to this, the subcutaneous tissue acts as a shock absorber pad. So it absorbs some of the shock that we go through and can protect underlying tissues from injury caused by bumps and blows to the body surface. Here again, you can see kind of the epidermis. You can see where the flake scales come from the stratum corneum. Remember, there's keratin in there. And you can see the dermis, which is that deeper tissue layer. Now, going back to that dermal epidermal junction, this is a specialized area between the epidermis on the top and the deeper dermis. It has small bumps called dermal papillae that help stabilize the junction. And there are blisters that are caused by the breakdown of union between cells or primary skin layers, and that's where that takes place at. Now, the dermis is that deeper, thicker of the two primary skin layers, and it's composed mostly of connective tissue. The upper papillary layer of the dermis is characterized by parallel rows of tiny little bumps called dermal papillae. And then ridges and grooves in the dermis form a pattern unique to each individual. This is the basis of fingerprinting. It also helps us improve grip for tool use and for walking. There is a deeper reticular layer of the dermis that's filled with a network of tough interlacing collagen, think of kind of collagen factors, and stretchable elastic fibers. The number of elastic fibers decrease with age and contributes to why we wrinkle. And the dermis also contains nerve endings, muscle fibers, hair follicles, sweat and sebaceous glands, and many blood vessels. So again, it contains fat, blood vessels, nerve endings, fibers, muscle fibers, hair follicles. So it really involves a lot of stuff in this, in this dermis. Now, below the dermis is that subcutaneous tissue. Now, I just said that there is some fat, there are some blood vessels that start at the bottom of the dermis, but most of our fat and blood vessels are found in the subcutaneous tissue layer. It is also known as the superficial fascia or the hypodermis. It is located below the dermis and it contains, remember, the yellow adipose fat cells and blood vessels. So that's where the majority of these live. It is not part of the skin and it lies deep to the dermis and acts as a connective tissue with it. We give a lot of injections in nursing through subcutaneous route. Next, let's talk about some accessory organs of the skin. This is going to be the hair, nails, and skin receptors. So hair, soft hair of the fetus and the newborn is known as lanugo. The hair growth requires epidermal tube-like structures called hair follicles. And hair growth begins from a small bump. It's a cup-shaped area called the hair papilla, and that's important to remember. So that's where the growth begins. The hair root lies hidden in the follicle, and the visible part of the hair is called the shaft. Then we have little teeny tiny erector pili that is specialized smooth muscle that produces goosebumps and causes hair to stand up straight. So here's the image of the hair follicle, and at the bottom you can see that C-shaped little kind of area of the papilla. You see that little, kind of looks like a little bump or a little C shape down there, and that is what houses the beginnings of hair growth. Then we have our nails. This is produced by epidermal cells over terminal ends of fingers and toes. The visible part of the nail is called the nail body, and the root lies in a groove and is hidden by a cuticle. The crescent-shaped white area nearest the root is called the lunula. Lunula. And the nail bed may change color with change in blood flow. One of the change that we see oftentimes is a bluish purple color called cyanosis. And that means that there is a decrease in the oxygen level in the body. So here's the structure of the nails. You see the free edge, the nail body, the lunula, and then there's the cuticle that houses the nail root. Now, skin receptors are specialized nerve endings that make it possible for skin to act as a sense organ. We have the lamellar corpuscle, the Pacini corpuscle. This is capable of detecting pressure. So lamellar corpuscle, pressure. Then we have our tactile corpuscle, which is the Messner corpuscle, and this is capable of detecting light touch, tactile touch. So again, you can see where at the bottom that little lamellar Pacini corpuscle is. You see the tactile, and again, tactile is touch, lamellar is pressure. Now let's talk about sweat or sudoriferous glands. Sudoriferous glands are what we think of odor, right? They're kind of stinky. So we have different types. We have eccrine sweat glands and apocrine. So our eccrine sweat glands are the most numerous, they are important, and they're widespread. They produce perspiration or sweat, which flows out through pores on the skin surface and functions throughout life to assist in body heat regulation. Then we have our apocrine glands. The apocrine sweat glands release secretion by way of ducts. So eccrine is ductless glands. Apocrine has ducts. So they release secretions by way of ducts. They're found primarily in the skin, in the axilla or the armpit, and around the genitals. These are the more odor-producing glands. They're larger and they secrete a thicker secretion, and again, associated with odor. Now we have sebaceous glands. These secrete oil for the hair and the skin. They grow where hairs grow, and they're tiny ducts that open into hair follicles. Sebum secretion increases during adolescence, and that's part of why a lot of adolescents end up with acne that kind of clog the little pores in there. Now, functions of the skin. This is vital that you know. The first is protection, right? It's the first line defense against infection by microbes, ultraviolet rays from the sun, harmful chemicals, cuts and tears. The skin also helps with temperature regulation. The skin can release almost 3,000 calories of body heat per day. And the mechanisms of temperature regulation are regulation of sweat secretion and regulation of the flow of blood close to the body's surface. Other functions are sense organ activity. The skin functions as an enormous sense organ. Receptors serve as receivers from the body, keeping it informed of changes in its environment. It also functions as excreting of sweat. This is where the body rids itself of waste, but not of vitamin D. The skin does not get rid of vitamin D, but it does get rid of other waste. These are excessive vitamins, drugs, and hormones that can be excreted onto the skin by the sweat. The skin actually synthesizes, so it produces, it like pulls it in and produces, and that is the cause of vitamin D. So synthesis involves the ultraviolet sunlight, in which it then will convert that and make vitamin D. Vitamin D is critically important to good health. And it can only come from the ultraviolet light, such as the sun. Now let's talk about skin cancer. We have 4 different types. We have Kaposi sarcoma, squamous cell carcinoma, basal cell carcinoma, and malignant melanoma. The causes of skin cancer, it does appear to have like some type of genetic predisposition, so it does kind of run in genes. But also the sun's UV radiation damages the skin cell DNA. DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid, and it causes mistakes during mitosis, which is part of the cell division for it to grow. So here's an image. You can see an A, this is squamous cell carcinoma. B is basal cell. C is malignant melanoma. You see how dark and black and just very erratic. There's no pattern at all around it. And then Kaposi sarcoma, which is more red, violet, purplish. So let's talk about squamous cell carcinoma first. This is a common type of skin cancer. It is slow growing. Lesions are painless, hard, raised nodules, and squamous cell carcinoma will metastasize. In other words, it will spread to other tissues and organs. That's what metastasize means. Next, we have basal cell carcinoma. This is the most common type of skin cancer. So basal cell, the most common type of skin cancer. It originates in the cells at the base of the epidermis, often on the upper face. These lesions begin as small raised areas that erode in the center. So they break down in the center, bleed, and then crust over. They are less likely to metastasize than any other skin cancer types, but they can grow very large and they erode in the centers. They break down the skin there. So basal cell carcinomas are still routinely removed, even though they can't metastasize and spread to other organs. Then we have malignant melanoma. This is the most serious form of skin cancer. It may develop from benign pigmented moles or excessive UV radiation that then transforms into a dark spreading cancerous lesion. If you remember, it was pretty much black. The incidence in the US is increasing. And we actually use the ABCDE rule of self-examination when we're looking at skin cancers. Warning signs, especially of malignant melanoma, is this ABCDE. Asymmetry. A means without. So anytime you see A in front of a word, it's without. So without symmetry. So if you split it in half, it's not the same on each side. Then the border. The border is what we call the induration around it, okay? And this border is usually very irregular. It doesn't make a perfect circle or oval or square. It's kind of crazy patterns. Diameter is how big it is, and then evolving. Is it progressing? Is it evolving from one type of like mole into something else? Now we have Kaposi sarcoma. This is caused with most often it's associated with a herpes virus, Kaposi sarcoma associated herpes virus. It is more common in persons with immunodeficiency, such as HIV or AIDS, and they are purple papules on skin surface, which quickly metastasize internally. Now let's move on to burns. So treatment and recovery or survival depend on total area involved and the severity or depth of the burn. So it's more than just one thing, right? It depends on the total area involved and how severe the burn is and how deep the burn is. The body surface area is estimated using what's called the rule of nines, and you will see this in your book. It is actually figure 6-10 in your book. But it is where the body is divided into 11 areas of 9% each. Additional 1% located around the genitals. So let's look at it. So this is the image that is actually figure 6-10. I apologize, in your book. And here's the rule of nines. So if you can see the arms, right? You got the front part of the arm is worth 4.5% and the back part of the arm is worth 4.5%. So if the whole right arm, front and back, were burned, that would be 9%. Let's say that the front of the right leg is burned, but not the back. Well, then if we add the 4.5% for the front, 4.5% for the back, that's 9%. Then we have another 9% at the front of the leg. That's going to be 9 plus 9 equals 18% of the body. So that's what we mean by the rule of nines. Okay, the front of the face is 4.5, the back of the head's 4.5. The torso is worth 18% if it's on the front, 18% if it's on the back. So you can kind of see by this image, we call this the rule of nines. It helps determine the percentage of the burns, how much has been burned. Then we have to classify the burns. First degree is what we call a partial thickness burn. It is only the surface layers of the epidermis. So just the outside. This is basically a typical red sunburn. Then we have a second degree. This is another partial thickness burn, but this involves the deep epidermal layers and always will cause injury to the upper layers of the dermis. So this is where blisters, severe pain, swelling, and fluid loss will occur in second degree burns. Then we have third degree or full thickness burns. These are characterized by complete destruction of the epidermis and dermis, may involve underlying muscle and bone, and the risk of infection is increased. So the third degree is full thickness. It involves muscle and bone. Then we have our 4th degree. These are full thickness burns as well. These extend below the subcutaneous tissue. It reaches the muscle or bone, and usually full thickness burns of 4th degree are a result of high voltage electrical burns or just extremely, extremely deep. So 3rd degree, again, it extends below the primary skin layers into the subcutaneous tissue. It can involve a little bit of the muscle and even a little bone, but it doesn't go near as deep as 4th degree. 4th degree goes all the way down into, like, you can see just massive damage. So again, here is the skin. So you can see 1st degree, it's just the epidermis, the skin surface. 2nd degree is partial thickness, and you can see where it goes down into the dermis and into the junction there that causes blisters and swelling and fluid leakage. Then you've got 3rd degree, which goes down a little bit deeper. You can see where the 3rd degree has gone down past the subcutaneous, little bit of muscle and bone. But 4th degree is where it reaches all the way through the muscle or bone, all the way through and down. So a lot of people get confused with 3rd and 4th degree. 3rd degree is full thickness, just like 4th degree, but 3rd degree, you can see a little muscle and bone, but it doesn't extend as deep or as bad as a 4th degree bone would. And a 4th degree burn is associated with more electrical type burns. And that concludes chapter 6. Y'all go study, and I wish you the best of luck.